Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. Welcome back to the podcast, y'all. I have another great conversation for you today with Katie Pilgrim of Lifted Lab. Katie is an incredible art curator, a connector, an advocate for spirituality and art. I came across her through her Instagram page, Lifted Lab, where she's curating just an amazing array of artists working in these spiritual spaces. A lot of the artists that I've come across and are sharing with you on the podcast began with me discovering them through her blog. So she has a real sensitivity to this and a real great sense of taste and understanding of this space and its potential for transformation. And a lot of our conversation sort of centered on those ideas. We began by just talking about her creative origins, her spiritual origins, and sort of how that led her to slowly evolve to being the person she is today and doing the kind of advocacy work and curation work that she does for artists. I think her and I are super aligned in our mission to not only create this sense of a movement around spirituality and art, but to also create a sense of community as well, and collaboration and connection. So I gained a lot of just incredible inspiration from connecting with her through this episode, and I hope you all will too out there. So here you go, Katie Pilgrim. All right, Katie Pilgrim, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing so good. How are you?
Doing great. I'm so excited to connect with you today. I know you and I are both super deeply invested in this space of spirituality and creativity and contemporary art. And, I'm always been so appreciative of your blog on Instagram, but then your website, where you're really drawing a lot of attention to the amazing kind of art that's happening around. And I'm really curious to sort of begin our conversation sort of about you and sort of what brought you into this space. Like, why are you interested in spirituality? Why are you interested in contemporary art? Like, how did this all kind of begin for you?
I would say the reason I'm interested in spirituality is probably the same for a lot of people. There's meaning there, there's inspiration there, there's grounding, there's so much resourcing for being a human and for having a soul and feeling connected to others and to the environment you're in. So like the more that I've come to explore spirituality, the more it's meant to me. And it's been a long journey that I've been on since, I guess, being a teenager, and it's still going. I don't see an end point ever.
Yeah.
So I love that, at some point I was able to connect the art of creating or the art of viewing creativity as a spiritual practice or a spiritual resource too. And that was happening through starting to get interested in different philosophies and the study of philosophy as a teenager, and going through some difficult times personally that I found music and art to be really healing and transformative. Wow. So the long story short is that it's a journey I've been on for a long time, and the more I've explored it, the more it's meant to me, and the more I've met other people who feel the same way, and it motivates me to keep going.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's really special to, be able to consciously tap into your spiritual connection from such a young age as a teenager. Some teenagers are just totally disconnected from that world in a lot of ways, and some aren't. But I'm curious, like, was there a moment when you were younger that, like, maybe an experience you had or a book you read or like something that like really like turned the light bulb on for you in some way? Can you recall any kind of specific moment?
There were definitely, moments throughout my whole life where I was drawing and in nature, and I spent a lot of time alone as an only child with two working parents. So there was a lot of these moments throughout the way where I just felt like the felt right. I felt like, oh, I'm comfortable, I'm inspired, I'm really just like content by myself. And that was pretty powerful as a young person to feel that.
Yeah.
And then as I grew older, it was feeling like, oh, wow, I can return to that space because I'm familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then those moments of spending a lot of time at bookstores when I was a teenager and meandering over to, the religious or philosophical sections, finding Eastern philosophies that were really resonating with some of the experiences I was having, where I was
Wow.
feeling like an expanded consciousness or deep inner peace, and
Mm.
seeing descriptions of things that I was feeling for the first time. um,
Wow.
so there was like doors just kept opening, and it was opening through listening to different music. Hip hop actually was opening my eyes and different doors for me too, to understanding just how you can connect to your soul and your vibration, and find
Mm-hmm.
ways to feel positive and feel connected. So it's just
Wow.
like I said, it would just open a door and then more doors are opening.
Yeah, just never ending, huh?
That's
It
kind of the
is.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's amazing about it, as I like unfold in my own spiritual path, like the deeper I go, the more I realize like it's an infinite space of evolution and growth. And that to me like instills within me a sense of like magic and wonder, adventure and excitement. It's not like you get to, this like peak and then it's over, but it's like an ever expanded experience, especially the deeper you go into it. I found that to be like a really surprising element that kind of defied in my expectation as I started to dive into these spaces of more conscious spiritual practice or inquiry, that it wasn't like a linear thing from like point A trying to get to point B necessarily. It was more of like a I don't know. It's more of like a way of being and an openness to like reality and letting it unfold in its own magical, mysterious way. I love looking through bookstores too. I did that a lot, and not as much in high school, but as I did in college. And like just standing around and looking, I would be it's just like you, like in the philosophy section, just like picking up books and just opening them randomly and reading and finding a lot of resonance. Is there any particular book that you can think of that was like really mind blowing for you? Anyone specific? I know I'm putting you on the spot because there's probably so
Yeah,
many to
there are
think of.
there are so many. I mean,
Yeah.
the Tibetan Book of the Dead was something that was really powerful to experience as a young
Hmm.
person.
Wow.
And just a lot of let me think of like a lot of like the symbols in Eastern philosophy that I was seeing, started to really piece together like the visual components
Hmm.
of spirituality for me too. But
Yes.
there's really like so many books I can remember picking up. The first time I picked up a book about metaphysics, my mind was blown again, like, as a teenager, and being like, oh wow, this is it's so many, it's in so many places. Like it's
Hmm.
here, it's in our culture on earth, but it's also like compounding on all these micro levels in the
Yeah.
cosmos and in different levels of reality.
Yes.
That was exciting to like think about how broad the spectrum of our consciousness can become.
Yes. Oh man, it's amazing. I can think of like when the first time I picked up the Tao Te Ching and like I read it and it was like at first it was very confusing but felt so interesting and true. Like I couldn't understand why like some of the words and some of the some of the different verses in there just really spoke to me, even though like intellectually like they're paradoxes in some sense. And that one always kind of opened my mind to like thinking about relationships of duality and like the harmony between opposites and things. But really Alan Watts was a big one for me, like the wisdom of insecurity. Like that
Yeah.
was like earth shattering for me. I think it really broke a lot of conceptions I had around culture and identity, in ways that like was so unexpected. It was like I definitely look at that one as like being like an explosive moment in my consciousness when I read that. Have you
Mm.
read that particular book?
Yes, right when
Yeah.
he said that title, I was, yeah, I agree 100%. What a
Yeah.
powerful book. And I'm like ready to reread that one right now, I think.
Oh man, it's so good. For anyone out there, if you've never really dove down the Alan Watts rabbit hole, it's quite a great one to go down. Talk about a master with words. Like he used words in a, like so artistically, like creatively, like he would just use words and put them against themselves in such an arrangement that just broke through your intellectual frameworks or attachments, you know. But yeah, that book is a really big one. So that's amazing. I mean, to be able for you to be exploring this from such a young age, and then slowly over time like piecing together and finding like a connection with creativity, like you mentioned, like the symbolisms that you came across, especially like in various Eastern traditions. And even like I'm sure you maybe looked into like the Hermetic traditions and like the alchemical traditions of like
Mhm.
of Europe, that really stem from like Egyptian sort of symbolism and stuff too. And it's amazing how like an image can evoke so much meaning and instill so much knowledge at the same time, like kind of hidden esoterically within it.
Yes, I agree. And I think once I even just scratched the surface of that, of realizing the power that images can hold and how long this tradition of imagery has been part of culture and been part of influencing one another and communicating such deep transformative concepts to one another, that's when I was like, okay, I kind of have all I need to know at this point, and I'm ready just to like go explore
Yes.
happening in the world from this
Yeah.
perspective now.
Yeah.
And then started finding artists who I was like, yes, this is that experience. I see things that mean something. I
Yeah.
don't have to have the words to back it up
Yeah.
necessarily, but I feel it.
Yes. It's amazing. I mean, we've been doing this as like a humanity. I mean, since the beginning of recorded time ish, if you call like, you know, marks on a cave a recording of time, you know, in space, like, right? Cave paintings that we found. But like, you know, and then it extends beyond that. It's like we innately reach toward images or symbols or icons as a way to express like what, and you know, whether we're limited through our vocabulary or like language, but like we're expressing something that's like beyond like the word itself. And so I think this is something that is just an innate part of like, it's kind of encoded in us as a humanity in some sense. And of course those systems of image making and those like symbols of communication have developed a lot of sophistication and nuance over, you know, thousands and thousands of years. But even so, like the potency of what an image can be for someone's consciousness is still all there, you know? And I think you know it when you see it,
Mhm.
when you see work that kind of like speaks to you, because it does in some sense for me, like when I see a powerful work of art, it almost envelops me in this sense of like awe in a way that like is almost like I'm the words have escaped me. It's
Mhm.
in a weird way, it like pulls all the language out of me and
Mhm.
puts me into this state of like knowing through feeling.
Mhm.
And to me that, and I feel like music obviously can do that in a very palpable way, but art can be a little more subtle sometimes depending on what you're used to seeing. Would you agree with that too? Like the ability for art to like kind of almost like take away language in some weird way?
Yes, absolutely. And I think at times it can act as technology, whether it's intended to be created for that purpose or not. But the shapes and the language of the colors, and the organization of the shapes and the colors and the composition can
Mm-hmm.
act as technology that is intended to communicate a message or be able to allow you to download a certain piece of information. And that's really
Mm-hmm.
powerful to be able to see something, maybe even for just a second, or to meditate on an image and be able to sit with that information. And it might come to you over time as well. So I feel like there's something really powerful there too.
100%. I love that you use the term technology because, like, you know, in some sense, we're so used to this idea of tech,
Mm.
meaning like digital and electronics and like dealing with like scientific instruments and all these things. But like technology is really like putting together, I guess, some form of intentional like process that has an ability to transform one's experience in some way. It's like, it's kind of like somebody, something is putting something together with the intention of transforming something else, I guess. I don't know how I'm not, I don't have a Webster dictionary with it. How do we, like, what is the definition of technology? Like, we definitely pigeonhole it into this sort of space that we're used to in the 21st century. But like, I look at something like meditation as a form of technology.
Mhm,
It's a technology of like enveloping yourself in a higher state of consciousness, or expanding one's sense of self beyond the boundaries of one's identity or body.
mhm,
It's giving us an experience of something else, in
mhm,
some sense.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I think that's really cool, like that you like phrase it that way, how it can like download
mhm,
information from it. I feel like whenever I have like a big insight, it feels like a download, but at the same time, sometimes it feels like a sense of like recall. Like, I remember something I forgot that I knew. You know what I mean? Like, when you
mhm,
come across something that is like super resonant with you, it has the feeling of like, oh, I knew that, but I
mhm,
just somehow somewhere forgot that. And it's just like instilling a sense of like primordial knowing or wisdom inside of you. And that's a really special experience in my life. Would you agree that like
mhm,
downloading or remembering can be maybe the same thing,
mhm.
depending
Yeah,
on,
I think
yeah.
so. And I think, you can, as a metaphor, consider the brain as a computer and something that can access different programs of reality and
Hmm.
different memories from different lifetimes. And
Yeah.
it can kind of go towards what you believe and what resonates, but the brain has so much capacity that we don't really understand to the fullest extent even, but
Yeah.
thinking of it in that way and what the brain's capable of, it's exciting to think about how we receive things that we recognize or that we don't necessarily recognize, but
Mm.
we feel that is right.
Yeah, definitely. And the brain itself, like like thinking about consciousness, I mean, it's still such a mystery to our most advanced forms of science. Like, we still aren't quite understanding like what is the source of consciousness itself.
Mhm.
And I guess there are kind of like two schools in that. There's sort of a more materialist school where like the brain is like a generator of consciousness, and when the brain turns off, consciousness is gone. And then another one where like kind of a more quantum space, I guess you might say, is like where the brain is more like a radio antenna or a receiver, and it's like be able to receive various vibrations or wavelengths in such a way that it creates a sense of reality from that, in a way. And consciousness is actually something that's just existent, and the brain is something that is filtering it or receiving it. And I don't know ultimately what's true or not true, but like my experiences with, deep states of meditation, lucid dreaming, psychedelic experiences push me to believe that like the brain is a very special instrument that is able to receive and filter consciousness that's existing in the universe in some way. But it's a fascinating debate that scientists are having. But I feel like there is so many things that like we have access to, but and then again there's just infinitely more things that are present that we just don't have conscious access to. And I think that's what art in some ways can speak to, is like this level of access we have to knowledge or wisdom or experience that's not on the forefront of our conscious mind. And
Mhm.
it almost like, I don't know, it almost like pulls it out of us and from these spaces it's existent in,
Yeah,
and that's a really amazing experience to have. Like, I don't know.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that art can be a conduit of consciousness, and
Yes.
like to say again, like the things that we don't have words for, or the language yet to fully, understand scientifically, somehow our consciousness is able to decipher enough of it to create an
Hmm.
image that resonates with others. So
Yeah.
there's truth there, and I'm excited and open to that truth, especially now that it seems like so many more people are interested in exploring it together.
Yes. Yes. Because I think it is something we need to explore together. Obviously, I think art, can be a very solemn, sort of solo mission kind of thing, by yourself in your studio making paintings or channeling drawings or whatever, any kinds of images, sculpture. I mean, the gambit's there of what you could be playing with in terms of material. But like, we also, I think, need a sense of community and collaboration and connection, and having this sense of shared space, because that's where ideas can pollinate with each other and create new varieties of something that might not have ever existed before. And I see that's kind of what you're doing in a lot of ways, is like you're creating this sort of nutrient dense soil for anything that wants to plant itself and germinate and pollinate and share root systems and information, and collaborate. It can do that. And like, you're at this point, like, much of a curator, like you're seeking out artists and you're bringing their images to our minds, you're bringing them to our feeds. You're going also now to explore their studios or highlight their shows that they're doing. But you're creating, with Lifted Lab, you're creating this kind of fertile ground for these ideas to start to have communication with each other, and artists having communication with each other. Like, I loved the piece that's on your website right now with I'm blanking on their last names, but with Erica and Rebecca
Mhm.
Borum and Erica Samogi. Am I pronouncing that
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
can't. Two amazing artists who I hope to have on the podcast at some point. Two really fabulous artists, but the whole thing is them talking to each other, which I found to just be such an amazing format for like an interview. You know what I mean? Through
Mm,
that. So I look at you as being sort of like a connector, not only a curator, but like you're creating this connection. I know that I've been connected to so many incredible artists who are interested in all these things that I'm interested in ways I might not have ever found had it not been for me coming across what you're doing. So I see what you're doing is facilitating a very important process of communication and collaboration. Because I think that's how we grow bigger ideas, right? That's how we grow a bigger consciousness, so that we can maybe have impact in other aspects of the world that we're a part of. Can you
mm.
maybe talk a little bit about like Lifted Lab and sort of like how that came together for you, and sort of your initial ideas for it, and how it's kind of maybe evolved?
Yeah. Thank you so much for all that recognition.
Yes, I mean
Really
it
appreciate
sincerely. I mean, I've
that.
just like, I've been following it for a while, and for a number of years, and I've been so grateful to connect with you through it. And now
Mm,
here we are.
thank you. That means a
you know?
lot. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Um, well, so with the name Lifted Lab, it is something that I've always seen as a place for experimenting. It's a bit of a laboratory, a place for trying ideas and for putting people together and seeing what happens and putting different formulas and scenarios together. So we've been doing this, myself and my collaborators, since 2009. It
Nice.
evolved quite a bit over the years. It was initially an arts collective. So it was myself plus infamous Jean Claude, Berg Visual, Bigfoot, a few other artists that I had met early on and found some resonance in their art that I felt was really important to share as often as possible and as in many ways as possible. So with that group of artists, I started to create venue spaces, whether that was in skate shops, sneaker stores, rented venue spaces, music spaces,
Hmm.
and create events where people could see art. And sometimes that was art shows, sometimes that was music and art shows, sometimes it was community healing events with yoga and food and art making. So I tried a lot of different styles of art shows with the goal of really promoting one group of artists at that time. And then that evolved into wanting to include other artists and expanding out of where we started, which is in the South, where I'm from, in East Tennessee. We went to Charlotte, North Carolina. We were in Nashville. And then we were going up to New York. And then we went out to Colorado, did some stuff in LA, went to Sweden. So it started
Wow.
to kind of grow and snowball in different ways. And then, it became something where I wanted to create the online platform and have that be more of a space for these experiments of, what can I share and what do people want to hear and what's helpful. And over the years was able to really narrow down something of my own curatorial lens of, what is this all about? Like being more specific about what's important about this art that I'm sharing, and is it, how can I categorize it? And it wasn't always something I called spiritual. It was something that I called, positive and uplifting, and, something that had a vibrational quality to it that was a little bit beyond description, but overall it was something that was really positive and helpful to experience. And that was the goal, was to create something positive for people through art, whether they were the artist or they were the viewer, and something that they would leave feeling uplifted from. And so as time has gone on, there's been more and more folks that seem to be expressing themselves through a spiritual type of art that are out there. And through Instagram, it's become so much easier to find one another. So, it evolved more once we got an Instagram account and we're able to connect to more people and find more artists, and change the website into more of a platform blog with interviews and art calendar that it has now, so that there's shows being listed in different cities that folks can find and visit. And I hope that it continues to evolve, and I'd love to start curating shows in person again soon too, because it's been a while since I've done that. So, it's continuing to evolve, and it's exciting, and it definitely has more of a cohesive story to it right now, which is exciting.
Yes, no, definitely. I love that. I mean, it's amazing how you just kind of, like you're saying, kind of snowballed it. Like you didn't really have a plan necessarily in the beginning, but you just knew that you had this kind of like attraction and gravitation, or this resonance with this kind of art making and these kinds of artists. And it just kind of brought you to where you are now. And I feel like you've really curated such a wide variety of artists working in this space in different ways, but there's still such a nice through line through all of it, which is, consciousness and spirituality, uplifting and positive, which is really important. But it's also important to note that sometimes like spiritual growth or spirituality can present itself not necessarily so uplifting and positive, because we have, the whole dark night of the soul. Like sometimes that spiritual journey really involves us stepping back from the light and really reverting into the shadows to really heal and uncover. And you mentioned briefly in the beginning how like your sort of spiritual journey was catalyzed through some really difficult times. I can say for myself, my spiritual catalyst, definitely in terms of like consciously engaging in spirituality, spiritual practice, exploration, came from really dark times. And so I think that's just something important to note as well, that this work can also have another component to it that's still equally important to recognize. Would you agree with that? I mean, it's a little harder to find or see necessarily the shadows, but we can see it,
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And in my own personal experience, feeling the dark feelings that I've felt and going to the dark places that I've been, there was an act of transmutation that was taking place when I was creating and painting and drawing, where I could actually alchemize that energy into something and then release that something. What I was creating wasn't always like a beautiful thing to look at. However, it was evidence of that thing I experienced, and it was real, and I could look at it kind of face to face and say like, okay, like I can take it or leave it at this point because it's out of my own self. I've been able to kind of wrangle and identify some of those things that were felt like inaccessible at times within myself. So I feel like the art is so powerful. It's a tool that you can use to transmute and transform energies. And then now, as personally, again, somebody who's more of a viewer than a creator of art for the past 10 years, I'm finding that art for me is helpful as a tool for viewing and finding the light that I'm seeking, or affirming the light that I've witnessed, and following the trail of light that exists in the world that affirms that things are going to be okay, and
Yeah.
I can choose the light, even though the darkness is inevitable. Duality is real.
Yes.
It's always there.
Yes.
I like having I like having the torch of light present to access, and now I've been leaning into Lifted Lab as more of that resource for light too.
I, I love that. That's amazing. It's really well put, like in terms of how art can be, how it can be a process of healing and transmutation. Like, and I love to use the phrase alchemize, like, the ability to turn something that is initially dark and difficult into something that is incredibly powerful and uplifting and beautiful and affirming and a guiding principle too. I mean, that's exactly my own personal experience. Like I look back at the dark and difficult times that I've had to experience in my life, like I look back at them as the best thing that ever happened to me. Like it
Mhm.
was the catalyst for my own inner transformation. And that is, in my opinion, the role of the darkness in the world. That
Mhm.
is the role of the shadow. It is almost like a slingshot. It's going to pull us in, but if we can engage in that process in a conscious way and surrender to the light that's coming forth, it'll shoot us out toward that. They kind of working together in some sense. But I know for sure, like when you're in the midst of it's hard to see that truth. And I think that's where art and music can help remind us, like you said. I like that you said the torch of light, like can lead us and remind us, or it give us maybe even a sense of confidence or empower us to endure and to continue, to strive on, so to speak, on your path, and know that it's going to lead you away from these dark places in time if you can just continue to stay in touch with this light. So I love that you're saying like you look for that in the art as like kind of a guiding principle to remind you or to affirm what's out there. And I can say personally that's exactly how I view it too. Like I when I've come across artists who are working in these spaces, who I can even sense even through the computer screen, that they're really channeling something very powerful and something very deep. Like it impacts me, it affects me. It's almost like nurturing the seeds of goodness inside of me. And as an artist myself, that's sort of the intention I always try to bring my consciousness to. And I'm making work is for it to nurture the seeds of goodness, of wellness, of well-being in others who see it. That's not always going to be the case because you can never control what somebody's ultimately going to take from your work. That's also the beauty of art too, is you have to let go. You can only control so much up to a point, and then eventually you have to let go and let the work live its own life and fight for itself to thrive in whatever environment it's going to be in. But I think to me that is like the ideal of what art and music can be, or any form of art performance, even comedy, great comedians. Like the really like art in itself in a way is like a technology, like we talked about earlier, for expanding our consciousness to deeper or higher or wider dimensions of what's possible in our life. And so for me, it's like that great power. And I think of like Superman, with great power comes great responsibility, like there's got to be a real responsibility there to nurture, to care, and to continue to cultivate that intention and not get, pulled back in by the ego, because I think that's something artists are always fighting against is their own ego or the collective ego wanting you to be a part of it. And I think that is that's part of the tricky territory we have to navigate, but also that's what makes it exciting too. And you're going to fall in those traps. Ultimately I fall in them still, but it's about that recognition and pulling out. And I think art can be an amazing way to pull you out of the sludge of your own ego you know do you come across that sort of battle for yourself, or do you see that in other artists or in the art world itself, like
Oh
this
yeah.
sort of competitiveness, this egocentric sort of quality in art or in the art world or in, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
in,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the art world for sure, which
yeah,
worked professionally in the art world for close to 15 years. So there's a lot of egos at stake there, not just artists, a lot of the gallerists and a lot of the people who want to be recognized, for different reasons. And it's very competitive. So of course the ego likes to get involved with the competition.
Loves competition.
Yeah, so that's been challenging to navigate because the reason I've been um, felt compelled to work with art is to support artists. I want to see them succeed. I want to see them, have exposure and share what they're making with other people. Like that, that's inspiring and motivating to me. And, coming into the art world, it was kind of like, well, you kind of have to choose now. Like, are you going to go down the art world path where you succumb to the ego and you name a gallery after yourself, and it's all about your face as the front of the thing, and thankfully the art world is changing a bit now, where some of the old structures and traditions and institutional ways of the art world are getting called out and really put on blast and are not accepted anymore. So it's exciting to see some of that change. But really, I've been grappling with that for as long as I've been part of it, of like identifying the things that, the structures that I wish weren't existing in the art world, but also seeing how, this is the world we live in, and there's capitalism and there's business, and there's got to be some way to do it right. So, part of the desire to create a moniker that wasn't my name was so that it wasn't about me, it's about the artists.
Yeah.
And it's challenging because at some point I have to, like right now, I have to show my face and use
Yeah.
my voice, and that can be a little scary actually.
Yeah.
I prefer to be in the background and to show the artists and the art. So there's like kind of an ongoing karmic, lesson there for myself of like balancing the ego and observing the ego in this world that is like to me very spiritual and very sacred. And so
Yes.
yeah, where's the line there?
I,
So I'm
I,
still playing with that.
no, me too. I think it's like you have to, in some sense, like I always love, like in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a really famous, like really historic, powerful. I don't know why I use the word famous. I mean, it is, worldwide known, like spiritual text, probably one of the, like, the most powerful ancient text there is. And the whole thing is kind of like a metaphor for like the ego versus the soul and its role that it plays. It's all about kind of roles and egos and all this. And I like the metaphor of thinking about the ego as being a servant to a higher consciousness. And so like we have to embrace our individual identity as Martin and Katie, but we also have to keep it in check, that like this isn't the ultimate. This is just a passing show. This is a role we're playing in this grand theater of life. But we are not the role, you know what I mean? Like it's like, like an actor in a film, like they're playing this character, but they're not ultimately the character,
Exactly.
there's something
Exactly.
else. And so we got to be able to like keep that in check. But at the same time, like you being who you are is a powerful thing. And like you also have to own that, but you also have to just keep it in its role. You know what I mean? That the ego is ultimately here to serve something greater than its individuated self, So I'm always trying to like remind myself that when I find that like the gratification of the ego gets kind of amplified. Ooh, I got likes. Ooh, they like that or like this, or I sold a painting. Ooh, or I got a show. Or no, like this is just a role, that you're playing, and you want to continue to keep that in check. And that's part of why I wanted to start this podcast. In some ways, is because I want to create this lack of like a competitive environment. The art world creates this competitiveness between artists in some sense, and I want to create more of a sense of like collectivity and collaboration and communication, and like that we're all like on the same team and we can all succeed. It's not like a one person can succeed. I feel personally that everyone can succeed if we use our resources wisely, if we sort of transform the way that we move in this world with a deeper intention and recognition of our inherent unity. And so for me, like I love being able to connect with you or other artists and create this shared common space and common language around what it is we're actually doing. Yes, you're Katie. Yes, I'm Martin, but like this is just a little role, but I think beyond behind that, we're playing a bigger role. Does that make sense for you?
Makes sense for me. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, that I always love the Bhagavad Gita for that reason, because I think it is just a great lesson in understanding that dynamic, you know, between consciousness, the soul, or the self, or the no self, like however we want to define
Mhm.
it, you know, and our
Mhm.
actual egos, you know. And I just see this space as something, especially when it comes to spirituality and art, like the more we come together and share these ideas, the better off everyone's going to be, because not one person has their thumb on what spirituality and art is, you know, or what spirituality ultimately is either. You know, there's so many diverse expressions of this energy, and you just know it when you feel it. But
Mhm.
and to me, that sense of like unity within diversity, or diversity within unity, is where the magic is in a lot of ways. So what makes life
Mhm.
exciting, kind of like what we talked about in the beginning, you know, it's an ongoing evolutionary process.
Yes. And I just, yeah, what is life without the magic too, you know?
Yeah.
The magic is so exciting, and I want to share that with so many people and for them to feel that and feel motivated by discovering magic and just being open to not knowing everything and not having the answers and discovering new things. And
Yes.
that joy of discovering something new and sharing something new. It's the magic in life, like that we all have access to and should be able to nurture.
100%, 100%. You know, it's like in Zen Buddhism, the beginner's mind, you know, it's like reverting back to that mind of like a child that is just so open with awe and wonder, and everything so fresh and new. And as we become older in our lives, certain subtle things that used to give us such a sense of awe and magic, we're just like, oh, that's just a cardinal bird in the tree. Like, what's the big
Mm-hmm.
deal? And you're like, no, look at that red bird. Like, look at that beautiful color. Like, listen to it, you know, like this initiation back into this sense of wonder is so important for, I think, you know, healing and the invigoration of the soul in a lot of ways. Because I think our materialist, consumerist, capitalistic framework that we've been brought up in is ultimately incredibly numbing to the senses, and that to me is a very dangerous place.
Mm-hmm.
When we become numb to the majesty of that, we are in the middle of a vast, infinite universe with, you know, planets spinning around, and gravity and stars, and you know, birds and bugs, and you know, the wind blowing through grass, and all these things, like the simple things we overlook, like when we can come back to them and just appreciate thing at their at face value for what it is, like that's that's where I find the most joy in my life, is when I can just bask in like a moment and feel the magic of the simple things that are happening around me, and how mysterious it is. We're on this rock floating in space. I feel that way. And my son and I ride a bike to school every day. And sometimes like I have these like weird visions of myself, like almost like zooming out from the bike and seeing myself from the perspective of like the grand universe looking down on me just riding my bike, like in the midst
Mm-hmm.
of the Milky Way galaxy. And it's just like it makes me smile from ear to ear, you know, like what
Mm-hmm.
are we doing here? This is crazy.
And that feels like exactly what you're supposed to be doing is
Right.
experiencing that joy and that liberation of that moment. And I wish that for everyone, you know. I
Me
feel like
too.
that's what we all deserve, and I want us all to have access to that.
Me too. Me too. 100%. And you know, I think we have a tricky road ahead of us to do that, you know, because I think the our culture is really deeply invested in this type of space where buying and selling and status and ego are like what we want, you know, or what a lot of people are hankering after. But I think really that's to me a symptom of something deeper that we want, which is just like connection,
Mhm.
and acceptance and recognition that someone can love us for the sole fact that we are just a living, breathing being. And that in and of itself creates a sense of worthiness.
Mhm.
But we find our worthiness somehow in material things. And I think material things are cool. But just like the ego, it's cool, it's useful, but it's not the end all be all. So I think we got definitely have a tricky road, but I think us coming together and communicating like this, engaging in these spaces of creativity and art, like these are all going to lay individual little bricks that are going to pave the path toward where it is I think ultimately we're headed, which in my vision is a beautiful place. It's just we gotta,
Mm.
got a little bit of a difficult, bumpy path before we get there. But
Yeah,
what's a story without some tricky territory?
it's the duality again, you know.
Yeah.
It's part of the world we live in, and I wish for myself and others to always stay inspired
Yeah.
to look for the possibilities.
Definitely. Definitely. What's inspiring you a lot these days? Like anything specific that's like come across your radar that's like really blown your mind lately?
Oh man. I kind of live in a constant state of inspiration and awe, and I mean nature, some things I can see 100 times and it doesn't lose that power with me. But I discovered new flowers pretty frequently. I live in California now.
Mm-hmm.
And so 12 months out of the year here in Northern California, there's things blooming. Um,
Yeah.
so this week, all the cherry blossoms were just
Wow.
exploding on the streets, and I'm just looking at the color of the pink, and it just gives me some feelings and some joy that are really special to have in the middle of winter, you know.
Oh yeah.
Some of the cacti and succulents that are blooming right now are just
Oh my gosh.
kind of surreal to look at, and just you look at it and think how beautiful, and also this beauty is here for a reason. Like this is part of its survival. This plant
Yeah.
and its evolution is its purpose is to be beautiful so that it can survive. And I just love thinking about how there's so much beauty in our world, and it's here for a reason, and we've co-evolved with it, and
Mm-hmm.
evolved to appreciate this beauty and interact with this beauty, and it feeds us as much as it feeds the natural environment. So I fall into these like spirals of like it starts with a flower, and then I'm like, gosh, think about how long this flower has been part of this world, and
Wow.
how much it's learned and it's evolved, and and then us together too as a species, we've both been here, so we've lended one things to one another.
100%. That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I was actually talking about this on another episode with another artist, just about like the evolutionary imperative of beauty itself. Like it is an incredibly important part of like thinking about pollinators and bees and like different, like the different forms of flowers and their colors, their shapes, their forms are helping attract pollinators so that they can help, continue to grow the species of plants, and create new ones ultimately, and all of that in that evolutionary process. So beauty has a place in the sort of evolutionary track of our collective planet in itself. Yeah, I mean, I look at nature all the time as like just points of inspiration as well. We have these Japanese magnolia trees down
Mm,
here in New Orleans that bloom in the winter. They just actually bloomed about a month ago or a little less than a month ago. And they're kind of like cherry blossoms in that they're
mhm.
very ethereal. They float on the branches without any foliage, and
Oh yeah.
they just feel like they feel angelic to me in some ways. And it's also like almost like if you think about it, even though we don't really have a harsh winter down here, but in a sense it's like they're almost signaling like don't worry, the winter will pass,
Mhm.
the difficult times will pass, spring is coming. Here's the torch of light, that we were talking about before, like in the form of the plant. It's like speaking to our souls and giving us inspiration. I could imagine in moments of like deep harsh winter when you see the big first flowers bloom, sort of the precursor of spring. It's like gives you the strength and fortitude to like continue on in some ways. So like there is this co-evolutionary relationship between us and everything in the plants, the animals, the insects, everything that surrounds us, the rocks, the minerals. Like, we are not ultimately separate from these things. We're all serving a role for each other's own well-being in some sense. And I think
Mhm.
the beauty of like the human incarnation is that we can like be conscious of this and employ that intention in such a variety of ways, like that to me is such a special thing. So I look at this life as being so precious, because it's an opportunity to be an expression of life that has a very unique ability to be conscious of
Yep.
what it's doing, and how it's either, helping or hurting this evolutionary collective imperative that we all have with all of life. So I
Mhm.
think that's a really good thing to point to is nature is always, y'all, nature is always a good place to begin and end and traverse. And when you're feeling a little lost or you're feeling a little disconnected, just sit like a child in a field and
Mhm.
observe the natural world as it is. This is a great practice for sure.
Mhm. Mhm. I
Yeah,
definitely agree with that.
yeah. That's why like sometimes in my mind I like thinking about art, and thinking about the tradition of like plein air painting and stuff, and like you put yourself out in nature and you're painting what you're observing in that space in that time, and you only have however long the light will allow you, and it's a real meditation and a real communion with the natural world through art making process. Like I find myself sometimes wondering like, why am I making work inside in a studio, so maybe one day when I have the means I can change that up a little bit. It's interesting, right? Yeah,
Absolutely. It is.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, this is really great being able to spend some time with you and get a sense of your sort of path and your inspiration and this mission that you have, and I'm on board, I'm on board. I'm on team Lifted Lab and team Katie, like, I feel like I'm on that same mission too. And I hope that we can continue to collaborate together, in time and try to again continue to build a sense of a movement in
Hmm.
this and bring more awareness to what this work is, how it can function, and getting more access for more people, because I think a lot of times this work, we're limited in our access to it in terms of depending on where you live, your social economic background, or what, you know what I mean, like there's limitations here. And so I want to find ways to bring this into people's lives more, and I think you are too. So thank
Yeah.
you for everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for assisting, with all of your support and just recognizing that this is a movement. Like you said,
Yeah.
this is an art movement now, and it's been bubbling up for so many years, for a long time. It's been wanting to be recognized as a movement in the art world, and the critics or whoever has, maybe dismissed it as new age or different titles, to not be taken seriously, a spiritual art movement. But it seems like we're poised now to be received, and there's so many of us that feel this so strongly.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, the art world again is like crumbling a little bit, so that it's going to be less of a restrictive, isolated island. It's going to have to be more open, and it's changing to become more accessible now.
Yeah.
So what great timing it is to see this shift happen together.
100%. I agree. The timing's so good. And I think also as this shift's happening, we can also, like I was just sort of pointing to a little bit, like re-envision like what the art experience can be,
Hmm. Hmm.
and re-envision what the art market and the art world could look like and how it could function to not just sort of bolster sort of elitism and like high society, but to bolster the greater community of the planet and be a facilitator or foster not only expanding consciousness, but conscious living and
Mhm.
equity and health and wellness and acceptance and dignity and all these beautiful things, that we want to bring into the world. And so it is a really good time to do it, but we still have to continue to find what avenues are going to be there for us to move into and take advantage of those, while at the same time not forgetting that it is a movement and it involves everybody, and that it's not one person over another, but it's like everyone can succeed and there's room for everybody.
Yeah.
And so unification is key, and collaboration is key. And so I'm excited to see where it goes, Katie. Well,
Oh man,
to
yes,
be
me
continued.
too. Yes, amen to all that. That's exactly how I'm feeling, and it's so cool to hear you say all that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we all have this vision in our heart and we're just trying to crystallize it and then find the right methods to manifest. Manifestation is important. It takes work, right? Like you can have a vision for an image or that you want to make, but if you don't sit down and you
Mhm.
don't mix the paint or you don't prepare the surface or you don't spend the time rendering it and placing it and caring for it, it's not going to come to be. So we still have a lot of work we got to do, but I think all the pieces are coming together. And so let's see what happens. Let's just keep going, plugging
Yeah,
along.
yeah,
So
exactly. Let's see what
awesome.
happens. And everyone's invited, and
Yep.
anybody who wants to come over to Lifted Lab and experiment in the laboratory or bring forth their ideas or collaborate, really open to other collaborators being part of what we're doing, and just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, 100%. I was just about to do that the same. Like everybody out there, you follow Lifted Lab on Instagram at Lifted Lab. Definitely stay in touch on their email list on the website, Lifted Lab, so you can be in touch in all the amazing interviews and articles and just be up to date on what kind of shows are going on out there and anything else that happens as Lifted Lab continues to evolve and grow. Thank you so much again, Katie, for being on the podcast. And I really look forward to working with you more in the future. So take care.
Thank you so much, Martin. It's been great.
Awesome. Awesome. Peace.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.